He thought he was untouchable. He thought money, status, and foreign language were enough to hide his cruelty. What he didn't know was that the invisible waitress he insulted in Japanese understood every single word, and that she'd been quietly preparing the perfect moment to call him out in front of everyone. Let me take you back to how all of this started. The restaurant was one of those places people posted about just to feel important. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights glittering outside like a wall of stars, soft jazz humming from hidden speakers. Every plate that left the kitchen looked less like food and more like artwork. And every waiter and waitress moved with the same trained grace, smiles fixed, back straight, eyes lowered when the wrong kind of guest looked at them too long. Tonight, like most nights, Hannah was one of those waitresses. She tied her dark hair back in a low ponytail, smoothed her simple black apron, and forced her lips into a gentle, professional smile. On the outside, she looked calm. On the inside, her stomach twisted, the way it always did on Friday nights when the most powerful guests filled the private dining rooms upstairs. You know that feeling when you're technically just doing your job, but it also feels like the rest of your life is standing on the edge of a knife. That was Hannah. Every single shift. She wasn't just working for pocket money. This wasn't a side job for experience. This job was rent. It was medicine for her mom's heart condition. It was the only reason her younger brother hadn't dropped out of school. So she smiled. She bowed. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. And yet, even in that polished, controlled world, there were lines you weren't supposed to cross. Tonight, someone was about to cross every single one. Upstairs, in the largest private room, a group of executives and investors were hosting a celebration dinner. Or at least, that's what it looked like on paper. Crystal glasses, a long mahogany table, bottles of wine so expensive no one dare pronounce their names wrong. And at the head of the table, leaning back like he owned not just the restaurant but the entire city, sat Renji Takeda. You know the type. The articles called him visionary billionaire, self-made prodigy, the man who reinvented urban dining. His chains of luxury restaurants stretched across countries. His face appeared in business magazines, his quotes plastered on motivational pages as if he was some kind of hero. But the staff at this particular restaurant knew a different version. The version who barked at chefs if garnish placement was off by half an inch. The version who could spend more on a single bottle of wine than most servers made in 3 months, and then still refused to tip. The version who would switch to a foreign language to insult his employees, assuming they didn't understand. And tonight, he was in a rare mood. Because tonight's dinner wasn't just a celebration. It was a performance. Across from him sat a cluster of potential investors, one of them, a cautious older man with silver hair, Mr. Chen, who was considering buying a huge stake in Takeda's company. This deal would open doors in a whole new region. Renji needed to impress him. To Renji, everyone in the room mattered, except the people wearing aprons. And Hannah, she was about to become the center of his show. Just not in the way he had planned. Hannah had been assigned to that private room because a manager trusted her. Stay calm. Be precise. Don't give him anything to complain about, the manager whispered before she went in. Hannah nodded, even as her heart beat faster. She'd seen Renji once before, from a distance. He hadn't even looked at her. But she'd heard stories, quiet ones, whispered by the staff when the doors were closed and the lights were off. Stories of humiliation, of sudden firings, of people leaving in tears because a man with too much power decided they weren't good enough to serve his food. Still, she took a breath, knocked gently, and slid the door open. The room fell quiet for a second, just long enough for everyone to glance her way. Renji didn't even bother tanning his head fully. He gave her a lazy side glance, as if checking the quality of a napkin. Hannah bowed. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hannah. I'll be taking care of you tonight, she said, her voice steady. Most of the guests gave polite nods. Mr. Chen smiled warmly. A few just checked their phones. Hannah went into autopilot, the one that every good server knows too well. Fill water glasses. Offer drink menus. Describe the specials. Remember who's allergic to what. Move like a shadow, never a distraction. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. But remember, stories like this never stay smooth for long. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a single, careless comment. A younger investor, slightly drunk already, waved his hand in the air and snapped his fingers. "Hey, you," he said, not even bothering to use her name. "More of this wine. It's good." Hannah gave a small, professional smile. "Of course, sir. Right away." She moved to pick up the empty bottle, careful not to brush against anyone's suit. As she leaned over, the same investor muttered something under his breath to Renji, just loud enough for a few people to hear. "She's cute. Maybe that's why the service is so slow. Everyone's staring at her instead of their plates." A couple of men laughed quietly. One woman clenched her jaw and looked away. Hannah heard it. Of course she did. You know how sometimes you can hear every word in a room that's not meant for you. Her ears burned, but her face didn't change. She'd heard worse. Renji raised an eyebrow, finally letting his gaze linger on Hannah for more than a second. "She's not slow," he said. His tone was amused, not apologetic, just unpolished. He switched languages then. He turned his head slightly, looked straight at Hannah, and said something in Japanese. Hannah's chest tightened. He smiled, a lazy, arrogant smile. The words, though you won't see them here, were cold and sharp. A dismissal. A joke about her appearance, her status. Something about cheap labor and pretty faces being easier to replace than broken plates. He said it in Japanese, like he was sharing a private joke with the air. Like he believed the language itself was a barrier that would protect him from consequences. A few of the investors didn't understand, but they laughed anyway because they saw his expression. People like that don't always need to understand the words. They just need to understand the power behind them. Hannah kept her head slightly bowed, her hand steady on the bottle. On the outside, nothing changed. On the inside, a line snapped. Because here's what Renji didn't know. Hannah understood. Every single word. You might be wondering, how? How did this waitress standing quietly in a fancy restaurant understand an insult thrown at her in a foreign language so fluently? To answer that, we have to rewind even further. Years ago, long before Hannah ever put on that apron, before she knew the taste of exhaustion from double shifts and the sound of lost trains leaving the station without her, she had a different dream. She was 16, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a tiny apartment, watching a cooking show filmed in Tokyo with subtitles at the bottom of the screen. Her mom was in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup. Her little brother was asleep on the couch. The host laughed as he watched a famous chef work. The chef spoke in Japanese, quickly and warmly, talking about flavors, balance, respect for ingredients. Hannah's eyes shone. "I want to study there one day," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "In Japan. I want to learn from real chefs, in real kitchens. I want to bring something back." Her mom smiled from the stove. "Then you will," she said softly. "You work hard. You're smart. You can do it." So Hannah did what a lot of dreamers do when they don't have money but they have hope. She learned. She saved every bit of allowance. She begged old textbooks from graduating students. She watched language videos late into the night. She'd sit on the balcony with her headphones on, repeating phrases under her breath so she wouldn't wake her brother. She practiced quietly, mimicking Japanese phrases in her room. She repeated basic greetings, apologies, polite phrases, over and over. It wasn't perfect at first. She stumbled. She mixed up words. She laughed at herself. But slowly, the sound stopped being noise and started to make sense. She learned how to order food, how to ask directions, how to apologize politely, how to bow at the right time. More than that, she fell in love with the culture, with the way respect was woven into language, with the way food was treated like an art form, not just something to sell. For a while, it looked like the dream might actually come true. She earned a partial scholarship to a culinary program abroad that partnered with a school in Japan. Her teachers believed in her. Her mom cried happy tears when the letter arrived. But life has a way of testing just how much you really want something. Right after the scholarship letter came in, her mom's health collapsed. A sudden diagnosis, expensive treatment, medicine that wasn't fully covered, a long stay in the hospital, money that might have gone toward travel, tuition, rent overseas, turned into bills, receipts, and late-night prayers. Hannah made a choice. She turned down the opportunity quietly. She told her teachers maybe next year. She told her mom everything was fine. And she went to Wike. Cafes, street stalls, back kitchens where no one saw the staff. She took any job that let her stay close to food because she couldn't bear to let go of that part of her dream, even if the bigger picture had faded. Along the way, her Japanese didn't vanish. She kept watching shows, listening to audio, reading menus and blogs online. Whenever a tourist came into a place where she worked and seemed lost, she'd softly offer help. Just a few words. Careful, shy. You know those skills you think you'll never really use for real because life veered off in another direction. That's what Japanese had become for her. Until she joined this high-end restaurant. Until she learned that its owner, the man behind the brand, was Renji Takeda. And he was from Japan. At first, she was excited. Maybe she could learn something directly from someone successful in the industry she loved. But then she started to hear stories from the staff. Stories about him snapping at servers in Japanese, assuming no one understood. Stories about him making degrading jokes about cheap local stuff and how they are like disposable utensils, use and toss away. Not everyone understood what he was saying, but Hannah did. She stayed silent, but she remembered. Back in the private room, Hannah's hands were still steady as she poured more wine. She didn't flinch, didn't look up, didn't show that his Japanese insult had landed like a punch. She simply said, in her usual calm voice, "Please enjoy. I'll bring the next course shortly." Then she slipped out of the room, closing the door gently behind her. Her manager was waiting in the hallway, eyes narrowed. "Everything okay?" he asked. Hannah hesitated. "Yes," she answered finally. "Everything is under control." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. Because in that moment, something inside her shifted. Up until now, she'd been surviving, enduring, letting things slide for the sake of peace, for the sake of her family's survival. But when someone insults not just your work but your worth, as a human, as if your existence is cheap and replaceable, it changes something. It stops being just about a job. It becomes about dignity. And that was the moment Hannah stopped being just a silent waitress and quietly became something else. A witness. And, soon, a strategist. Over the next hour, the mood in the private room grew louder and more reckless. Wine flowed. Jokes got meaner. Stories got exaggerated. Renji seemed to delight in having a small audience. He'd lean in, tapping the table as he boasted about expansion plans, about regulatory loopholes, about how easy it was to keep staff obedient in certain locations versus others. Every time Hannah entered with another course, his eyes would flick over to her like he was checking if the decor had improved. Sometimes he ignored her. Sometimes he made a pointed comment in English about service standards. And sometimes, when he was feeling especially bold, he slipped back into Japanese. He'd say things like, he muttered in Japanese about work as being interchangeable parts. He joked in Japanese about how pretty girls made the best disposable stuff. He laughed in Japanese about how one complaint from him could ruin an entire career. Hannah collected plates and delivered food with the same outward calm. Inside, she was memorizing. Every time he looked to the side, she took a tiny mental snapshot. Every careless phrase in Japanese was etched into her memory. She didn't even realize when, exactly, the idea appeared in her mind. All she knew was, she was done pretending not to understand. But Hannah wasn't reckless. She couldn't afford to be. Getting fired would mean more than losing a job. It would mean risking her mother's medicine, her brother's tuition. So instead of storming back into the room and shouting then and there, she did something else. She started investigating. While the guests laughed upstairs, the staff downstairs moved through their own organized chaos. Steam rose from huge pots in the kitchen. Chefs barked out orders. Dishwashers moved like soldiers on a battlefield. The air was thick with the smell of garlic, butter, and stress. Hannah slipped into the narrow service corridor near the office, purpose in her steps. On the wall by the office door was a printed memo, one she'd seen 100 times but never really paid attention to. The official company value statement, signed with a digital version of Renji's signature. Words about respect. Words about integrity. Words about we treat our staff like family. Her lips tightened. She knocked on the office door. Her manager, a tired woman in her 40s named Lila, looked up from a pile of paperwork. "Hannah, you okay? Do you need a break?" Lila asked. Hannah closed the door behind her. "Can I talk to you about Mr. Takeda?" she asked quietly. Lila's entire body tensed. "What did he say?" she asked, already sounding defeated. "Did he call you slow again?" "I'll talk to him later." Hannah shook her head. "It's more than that. He uses another language. Japanese." She swallowed hard. "He thinks we don't understand him." Lila frowned. "Do you?" Hannah met her eyes. "Yes." Something changed in Lila's expression, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "All those times she started, then stopped." "Hannah, you have to be careful. This guy isn't just any guest. He owns the brand. If we push too hard." "I know," Hannah said. "But there's a limit, right?" "There has to be. Our company handbook says we can't tolerate harassment from guests." "What about from him?" Lila looked at the policy binder on her desk, at the line that said zero tolerance for abusive behavior. She looked tired. Not just physically, but soul-tired, from years of being caught in the middle between powerful owners and vulnerable staff. "Hannah," she said softly, "if you file a complaint, it will go to corporate. And corporate is him. Or his people. Do you understand?" Hannah did. It wasn't just one difficult customer. The problem was the system itself. The hierarchy. The old boys' club where billionaires had dinner together and laughed in languages they assumed no one else understood. But systems are made of people. And people can be held accountable, if you shine enough light on them. "Who's in the room with him?" Lila asked suddenly. Hannah straightened. "Some investors. One of them is Mr. Chen. I heard his name. He's considering a big partnership. They said this dinner might decide everything." Lila's eyes narrowed. "Does he seem decent, Mr. Chen?" "He thanked me. He looked me in the eye when he ordered. He apologized when someone else was rude." Hannah paused. "He doesn't seem like the others." A slow idea formed between them, unspoken but growing heavier in the space. If corporate wouldn't listen, maybe someone outside the system would. "Hannah," Lila said carefully, "I can't tell you what to do. But if you're going to speak up, you should be smart about it. Document everything you can. And choose your moment." Hannah nodded. She left the office with a copy of the company's own values in her mind and a decision forming in her chest. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to create chaos. She was going to tell the truth, in the one language Renji thought would protect him. For the rest of the evening, Hannah watched more closely. Every time she went into the private room, she carried more than plates and bottles. She carried awareness. She studied where Mr. Chen sat, how he reacted when Renji made offhand remarks. She noticed how his expression tightened when Renji boasted about cutting staff costs while swirling his glass of wine. She listened as Renji bragged, in English this time, about pushing back against regulations, about running lean teams. "We pay them well enough, by their standards," he said with a smirk. "And if they don't like it, there are thousands more lined up for the job." Some guests chuckled uncomfortably. Others said nothing. At one point, Chen set his chopsticks down and asked calmly, "And what about staff well-being? High turnover can damage long-term profitability." Renji waved a hand. "Please, you're overthinking it. People complain, sure. But as long as we deliver the experience for our guests and keep labor costs down, the bottom line is beautiful." As he said labor costs, his eyes flicked toward Hannah's back as she walked away with a tray. He then added, in Japanese. He remarked in Japanese that staff were replaceable tools, not partners. He said it lightly, almost singing the words. Hannah's grip tightened around her tray. By now, she had enough. Enough awareness. Enough clarity. Enough proof, not on paper, but in her memory, in her own lived experience. All that was left was to choose the moment. And that moment came sooner than anyone expected. Dessert. In fancy places like this, dessert wasn't just food. It was theatrics. Tiny plates with intricate designs. Handwritten chocolate letters. Flames, sauces, powdered sugar like snow. Tonight, the final dessert was a special one. A tasting platter designed personally by the head chef, based on seasonal ingredients. It was also the finale of the evening, the last impression. Hannah rolled in the dessert cart, her posture textbook perfect. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said gently, We've prepared a special dessert selection for you tonight. Allow me to present each course." She placed plates in front of each guest, describing the flavors. When she reached Renji, she bowed slightly deeper. "And for you, sir," she said. He glanced at the dessert, then at her. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You know," he said in English, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "there's a reason I don't like hiring local staff for my flagship properties. Standards are inconsistent." People shifted in their seats. Hannah's heart thudded. She knew what was coming next. Sure enough, he tilted his head, eyes never leaving her, and switched to Japanese. He said in Japanese that she was barely acceptable, that at least she's nice to look at, and that if she makes one mistake, there are 100 girls ready to replace her tomorrow. He laughed about how they never understand anyway. A few people chuckled awkwardly, thinking it was some private comment about the dessert. Hannah stood still. Then, slowly, she lifted her head and met his gaze. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was steel underneath. "Sir," she said in English, "for the record, I understood everything you just said." The room went silent. One of the investors choked on his drink. A fork clinked against a plate. Someone's phone stopped mid-scroll as their hand froze. Renji blinked, surprised, just for a second. Then he laughed. "Oh, you speak a few phrases?" he asked, amused. "How cute." Hannah didn't look away. "In perfect, fluent Japanese," she replied. She spoke in Japanese, clearly and confidently, explaining that she understood not just his words, but his meaning. She repeated his insults back to him, precisely as he'd said them, about cheap labor, disposable pretty faces, and replaceable tools. Everyone watched as his smile slowly froze. Mr. Chen's eyes widened. Several guests looked between Hannah and Renji, shocked. They didn't know the exact content of her Japanese words yet, but they could feel the shift in the air. And Hannah wasn't done. She continued in Japanese, her voice slightly louder now so the entire table could hear. She said in Japanese, "You have insulted me and my colleagues many times tonight, assuming we are too ignorant to understand you. You joked about us being disposable. You called us tools. You said one complaint from you could ruin our lives." Then, switching smoothly to English, she added for everyone else's benefit, "Allow me to translate what has been saying about us this evening. You know that moment in a movie where time seems to slow down, where everyone knows something big is about to happen, but no one moves? That was this. No one stopped her, not even Lila, who had quietly stepped into the back of the room without anyone noticing, eyes wide, hands trembling at her sides. Hannah took a breath, shoulders straight. In Japanese, she said clearly, "Mr. Takeda has repeatedly referred to his staff as disposable tools and cheap labor. He joked about firing us for entertainment. He said pretty servers are easy to replace, and he prefers us to stay quiet and obedient so he can run lean and keep profits up." She felt her voice shake for a second, but she didn't let it show. "He assumed we didn't understand," she continued. "But I do. I've understood every word since the first time he spoke that way in this restaurant." A stunned silence followed. All eyes turned to Renji. His cool facade started to crack. "That is a gross exaggeration," he snapped. "You're twisting my words. This is an unprofessional outburst. I will not be slandered by staff in front of my guests." But his mistake was forgetting that some of those guests had understood, at least partially. One of them, a middle-aged woman sitting 2 seats away, raised her hand hesitantly. "I don't speak Japanese, but I heard tool several times," she said softly, "and I know enough to recognize cheap." Another guest, a younger businessman, cleared his throat. "And I heard you mention pretty faces and replaceable in the same sentence." The room's attention shifted again. Hannah could have stopped there. Just revealing his insults would have been enough to shock everyone. But remember, this wasn't just about one night of humiliation. This was about a pattern, a system. So she'd come prepared. Hannah reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small folded sheet of paper. "Before service tonight," she said quietly, "I reviewed our company's written values and policies." She unfolded the page and read aloud, her voice steady. "We believe our staff are the heart of our business. We commit to treating them with dignity and respect, without exception." She looked up. That's from our employee handbook. The one with your name on it, sir. Renji's jaw clenched. This is hardly the time, he began. Mr. Chen finally spoke. I think it's exactly the time, he said, his tone calm but firm. Because this is not just about how you speak to this young woman. It's about how you see everyone who works for you. He turned to Hannah. Do you feel safe to continue? He asked gently. It was such a simple question. One she wasn't used to hearing from anyone in power. Hannah swallowed, emotions catching in her throat. Yes, she said, because this isn't just my story. She gestured toward the door, where a few other staff members had gathered. Servers, kitchen assistants, even a dishwasher still wearing wet gloves. They've heard things too, she continued. They've experienced being shouted at, belittled, threatened. Some of them were afraid to speak up. Some of them left quietly. And all the while, our company wrote beautiful sentences about valuing us like family. Her eyes flicked back to Renji. In Japanese, you said we're disposable. She repeated that word in Japanese. Tonight, in front of your investors, I just wanted to make sure everyone heard what you really think, in both languages. You could almost hear the sound of something snapping inside his pride. Enough, he hissed. You are fired. Right now. Get out. He stopped mid-sentence, because in the same second, two things happened. First, Lila stepped forward. Actually, she said, voice shaking but clear, I've been recording this entire exchange. Our HR guidelines allow staff to document incidents of harassment, especially when there's a language barrier. I didn't want to believe it would come to this, but here we are. She lifted her phone slightly, the screen showing a waveform app still running. And second, Mr. Chen pushed his chair back and stood up slowly. Sit down, Renji, he said quietly. The command stunned everyone. This was Renji's domain, his private room, his brand. He wasn't used to being told to sit, but there was something in Chen's tone, a calm authority, that made even him obey on instinct. Reluctantly, Renji sat today. Chen looked around the room, taking in the tense faces of staff and guests. I came here tonight to decide whether to invest a significant amount of money into your empire, he said. I've spent months reading your reports, your press releases, your polished presentations about caring for your people. He turned to Hannah. And then, tonight, I watched your heart of the businesses be treated like trash in plain sight, and in a language you thought she couldn't understand. He shook his head. I may not speak Japanese, he continued, but I speak human. And this is not someone I can trust to lead a company I'm associated with. Renji's face drained of color. Now wait, he said quickly. You're overreacting. She's clearly emotional, exaggerating. This is one disgruntled employee. Hannah didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She simply said, in Japanese, if I were exaggerating, you wouldn't be this afraid of people hearing the truth. Even the guests who didn't understand the words felt the impact. Chen exhaled slowly. I will be terminating all negotiations, he said firmly, and I will be reaching out to your board with my reasons. You boast about brand image, but reputation is not built on decor and menu design. It's built on how you treat the people who pour the water and carry the plates. He glanced at Hannah again. You were very brave, he said softly. I'm sorry it had to come to this. Renji sputtered. You can't do this based on the word of a waitress. But Chen cut him off. I'm doing it based on your words, he said. She simply translated them. When powerful people fall, it doesn't always happen in a dramatic explosion. Sometimes, it starts with a quiet shift. A single person saying, enough. That night, something broke open. Not just in that private dining room, but in the entire company. Within days, the recording Lila had made was sent to HR. Copies were accidentally shared with some journalists who had already been suspicious about the company's glossy image. Articles appeared, not with the pictures of Renji smiling with champagne, but with anonymous quotes from former staff, with phrases like toxic culture, verbal abuse, and systemic disrespect. One article referenced an incident where a waitress called out the owner in the very language he used to demean her. The board of directors wasn't interested in moral lessons. They were interested in money. But when public outrage started, when investors like Chen publicly backed away, when customers canceled reservations, one thing became very clear. Renji's behavior wasn't just harsh leadership. It was a liability. He was forced to step down temporarily while an internal investigation took place. Temporarily turned into indefinitely. Official statements were released about restructuring and renewed commitment to staff welfare. Some people scoffed, assuming it was just PR. But on the ground, in Hannah's restaurant, things actually began to change. Because once one person has the courage to speak up, it becomes easier for others to follow. Staff who had quietly swallowed insults started documenting them. Managers like Lila stopped shrugging and started pushing back. Corporate sent representatives, not to interrogate staff, but to listen. It wasn't perfect overnight. It never is. But the culture shifted. And so did Hannah's life. Months later, the restaurant felt different. The private room still hosted powerful people, but the staff no longer moved like shadows. New guidelines were posted in the back, not just about customer service, but about staff rights. Abuse, verbal or otherwise, would not be tolerated from anyone. One afternoon, just before dinner service, Hannah stood in the kitchen, watching the head chef as he experimented with a new dish. He glanced up at her. "Well," he asked, "be honest." Hannah smiled, savoring the taste on her tongue. "It needs a little more acidity," she said. "Maybe a touch of citrus zest." He grinned. "Thought so. You have a good palate." He handed her a folded slip of paper. "By the way, this came for you. Looks official." Her heart skipped. She opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter with the logo of the culinary program she'd once dreamed of attending. The one she turned down when her mom got sick. "Dear Ms. Soto, we are pleased to offer you a renewed scholarship." Her vision blurred for a second. She had reapplied quietly weeks ago, encouraged by Lila and a few friends. She hadn't told her family yet because she didn't want to raise their hopes. Now, the decision lay trembling in her hands. "I heard they were reviewing applications again," the chef said casually. "You've grown a lot this year. You deserve it." Hannah thought of her mom, who was doing better now with more consistent treatment. Of her brother, who had started tutoring younger students for extra money. Of the co-workers who had hugged her the night everything happened, some thanking her through tears for saying what they couldn't. "I don't want to abandon everyone," she admitted softly. "You're not abandoning anyone," Lila said from the doorway, having overheard. "You're doing exactly what you always wanted. And maybe one day, you'll come back, not as a waitress, but as a chef, or a consultant, or an owner who actually lives by the values printed in the handbook." Hannah smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Do you really think I can do that?" she whispered. Lila nodded. "You already did something most people in this industry only dream about," she said. "You held a billionaire accountable, in his own language." "And what about Renji? He didn't vanish overnight. People like him rarely do. For a while, he resurfaced in smaller circles, trying to frame the incident as a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. He tried launching a new project overseas, but the scandal followed him. Potential partners pulled out once they read the old articles. Former staff started leaving reviews about their experiences whenever his name appeared. Without the shield of reputation and trust, his empire shrank. He wasn't penniless. He wasn't living on the streets. This isn't a fairy tale with cartoonish revenge. But instead of being the untouchable king of glossy restaurants, he became smaller. His name no longer inspired awe. It inspired caution. And maybe that was the real consequence he never expected, living in a world where his power didn't automatically erase the truth. As for Hannah, a year later, she stood in a bustling kitchen in Japan, wearing a white chef's coat. Her Japanese had become even more fluent. She gave instructions in Japanese to junior students, guiding them through a recipe. She joked lightly in Japanese with a fellow trainee about overcooking noodles. Sometimes, when she caught sight of her reflection, hair pinned back, eyes focused, movements precise, she barely recognized herself. Not because she'd become someone else, but because she'd finally become who she always wanted to be. She still sent money home. She still messaged her old co-workers. She still carried that night in the private dining room like a scar and a badge at the same time. One evening, As she walked back to her small dorm room after class, her phone buzzed. It was a photo from Lila, the old restaurant, newly renovated, with a caption, "New management, new culture. We kept the good parts. Thought you'd like to see what you helped start." Hannah smiled. She typed back, in Japanese and English mixed together, "I'm proud of you all. Keep going, and feed people well." Then she looked up at the night sky, the stars faint against city lights, and breathed. She had once believed that speaking up would cost her everything. Instead, it became the bridge to the life she'd been dreaming of for years. So, what's the point of all this? Why does this story matter to you, watching from your phone or laptop? Because maybe, like Hannah, you've been underestimated. Maybe someone with power in your life speaks over you, around you, or about you as if you're not even there. Maybe they use their status, their money, or even their language to make you feel small. Maybe you've swallowed insult after insult because walking away isn't as simple as some people make it sound. Because you have bills, family, dreams you're afraid will die if you make the wrong move. If that's you, I want you to remember this. The way someone talks about you when they think you don't understand says everything about who they really are, and nothing about your actual worth. You are not cheap labor. You are not disposable. You are not a tool. You are a human being with potential, dignity, and a story no one has the right to erase. Does that mean you should stand up in the middle of your next shift and yell at your boss? Not necessarily. Real life is complicated. Safety matters. Timing matters. Strategy matters. But what Hannah did reminds us that there is power in truth. Power in preparation. Power in quietly gathering strength until the moment comes when you can speak and be heard. If you've ever been belittled, mocked, or treated as if you were invisible, you're not alone. And if you believe that people matter more than profit, that respect matters more than image, that integrity matters more than status, then you're part of the reason stories like this can end differently. Because every time you support businesses that treat their staff well, every time you refuse to laugh along when someone is humiliated, every time you listen to the quiet person at the edge of the room, you're choosing a side. You're choosing people like Hannah over people like Renji. If this story hit close to home, if it reminded you of a job you worked, a boss you had, or a moment when you wanted to speak up, let me know in the comments. Share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you want more true-to-life stories about power, courage, and people who refuse to stay silent, make sure you like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Because somewhere out there, right now, another Hannah is carrying a tray into a room full of people who think she can't understand them. What they don't know is that she might just be listening. And one day, she might finally decide to speak.